The heat from the concrete courtyard still hadn't dissipated when 6 children vanished at the Brewster-Douglass Projects in Detroit, once one of the city's largest public housing complexes. That July evening arrived with music drifting from the community outdoor movie screening, drowning out the usual sounds of a neighborhood in decline. Around 8:10 p.m., a few parents still saw the group of kids running across the parking lot, glow sticks glowing and swinging in their hands as they laughed and talked with one another. The children only moved a few dozen meters out of the lit area, crossing a narrow pathway between rows of abandoned buildings, a route adults had often warned them not to take after dark. One mother, watching from a distance, caught a final glimpse of her child's brightly colored shirt, flashing before the darkness swallowed the north side of the courtyard. What happened in the next 7 minutes would haunt Detroit for the following 14 years. Before we dive deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of the latest cases. Detroit, July 19, 2008. The Brewster-Douglass Projects lay steeped in the muggy air of a summer evening. The old brick buildings were covered in peeling paint. Cracked concrete courtyards were interspersed with patches of wild grass, and children ran around amid the sound of footsteps mixed with music coming from temporary speakers set up in the central courtyard, where the community was holding one of its rare outdoor movie nights. In that scene, 6 children from different families gathered into a small group: Emily Carver, 7 years old, lively; her cousin Jordan, 12 years old; Alina Briggs, 10 years old, who lived in the same row; brothers Marcus and Terry Lawson, 8 and 14 years old; and Luis Cortez, 9 years old, who had moved there earlier that year. The group had been allowed by the adults to play near the courtyard while everyone prepared for the movie screening, and the children's main purpose was simply to enjoy the rare evening when the neighborhood was so lively. As the movie was about to start, test light from the projector spilled across the weathered buildings. Residents set out rows of plastic chairs, and adults quickly bought water and snacks from a small makeshift stand. Around 8:05 p.m., while the adults were busy settling the audience, the group of 6 children left the movie area, heading toward the parking lot a few dozen meters away, where the darkness lay thicker beneath the flickering streetlights. They ran and laughed out of curiosity, none of them noticing that this was an area out of sight of most adults. A boy named Deshaun Turner, 9 years old, happened to be standing near the edge of the movie courtyard and noticed something unusual. At the far edge of the parking lot, where the light was only enough to make out shapes, there stood a middle-aged white man next to an old red pickup truck, a Ford model, with the passenger door slightly ajar. The man appeared to be watching in the direction the children were heading, but since there was no specific alarming action, Deshaun didn't tell anyone, and was quickly drawn back by calls to come watch the movie. Between 8:10 and 8:17, as the movie area became packed, the adults' attention was fully on the screen and seating area. No one noticed how far the children had gone. When a parent called for Emily to come back for a drink and received no response, they initially thought the kids were just playing nearby. But when they stepped out of the lit area and looked toward the parking lot, they could no longer see any of them. Families began splitting up and running around the courtyard, checking the playground, stairwells, around the building rows, and between the old cars lined along the parking lot edge. There was no reply, no trace, no unusual sound. By 8:25 p.m., when all efforts to search the nearest radius proved fruitless, panic began to spread. Families called their children's names louder, running deeper into dark corners, knocking on nearby apartments to ask if anyone had seen the group, but everyone shook their heads. By 8:31 p.m., realizing that 6 children had vanished simultaneously and could not have gone far on their own in such a short time, one parent immediately called 911 to report that the children could not be found anywhere around the housing complex. Just seconds after the call connected, the Detroit Police Department dispatch received the emergency information, marking the official entry of law enforcement into the serious missing persons case at Brewster-Douglass Projects. The dispatcher logged the initial information at high priority and immediately dispatched the 2 closest patrol units to the area. Roughly 20 minutes later, the first 2 police cars rolled into the housing complex courtyard, their red and blue lights sweeping across peeling walls, and the anxious faces of residents gathering in confusion around the now interrupted movie area. The supervising officer quickly approached the group of parents to confirm the number of missing children, their ages, clothing, last seen time, and estimated direction of travel. Once it was established that all 6 had disappeared within the same brief time frame, the police immediately established the first search perimeter, covering the entire central courtyard, the north parking lot, and the connecting pathway between the 2 adjacent building rows. One team was assigned to coordinate the still scattered residents, directing them to regroup and search only within lit areas to avoid chaos, while other officers checked every possible location the children might have visited between 8:05 and 8:17 p.m. The parking lot was the first checkpoint. The dark gaps between tightly packed old cars were illuminated with flashlights shining under car chassis, into truck beds, along wall corners, and into rear emergency exits. No fresh footprints were found, no scratches or objects other than thick dust on the concrete. When sweeping near the parking lot edge, one officer spotted a small, faintly glowing object lying close to a wheel, a green glow stick, still fresh and emitting a dim light. Parents confirmed the children had been carrying free glow sticks handed out at the movie event. This was the first and only piece of evidence recorded in the area that night. From there, police expanded the search to the abandoned schoolyard west of the complex, a former playground that had been loosely fenced off and rarely used. Flashlights swept across chipped stone benches, long cracks in the pavement, and the area under the collapsed bleachers, but no movement was detected. No dropped items, no fresh mud, no sound or sign that the children had entered the area during the reported time frame. Next, the search team checked the dark corridors and stairwells connecting the building rows. Occupied apartments were knocked on for information, while nearby abandoned units were opened with specialized tools for interior checks. More than a dozen long vacant apartments were swept room by room, floors thick with dust, broken windows, no sign of children passing through, no new items or traces. Officers paid special attention to the possibility of a struggle or forced movement, but the ground showed no cracks, no drag marks in the dust, no overturned chairs or displaced objects. The entire area appeared to show no clear evidence of a struggle, flight, or forcible dragging. When time passed 11 p.m. and the nearest search radius had been thoroughly covered, police temporarily halted further expansion due to lack of leads to determine a specific direction. A preliminary report was filed that night, noting 6 children missing between 8:10 and 8:17 p.m., the only trace being a glow stick found near the parking lot, no evidence of struggle or forced movement, and no usable camera footage obtained. Around midnight, after sweeping all feasible areas in the darkness, police ended the first night's search operation, but maintained emergency priority status, requesting additional forces for the following morning to expand the investigation. On the morning of July 20, 2008, with reinforced personnel back on scene, Detroit PD began the next critical step, collecting witness statements. Child witnesses were prioritized as they were likely the last to see the group before the disappearance. Deshaun Turner, 9 years old, was brought to a temporary area for an interview, following standard juvenile protocol, and in that quiet space, he recounted that around a little after 8 p.m., while preparing to return to the movie area, he had seen a white man standing next to a red pickup truck at the edge of the dark north parking lot. Deshaun said the man did nothing directly to the children, but his gaze was directed straight toward where the kids were running. This was the first valuable description, and also matched the timing of when the group left the event area. Police carefully recorded the witness's position, angle of view, and estimated distance between the boy and the truck to assess the accuracy of the statement. After finishing interviews with the children, police collected information from adults present near the parking lot at the time. A woman living in the opposite row confirmed seeing small lights from a red pickup truck turn on then off, though she couldn't recall the exact time. A middle-aged man returning home around 8:10 p.m. also reported hearing a brief engine start, but the sound blended with the movie noise and traffic on Gratiot, so he paid it no mind. These statements were compiled and cross-referenced with the position Deshawn provided. Although the adult information was not precise, police noted the consistent element of a red pickup truck present in the area during the exact time frame of the children's disappearance. Next, the investigative team constructed a detailed timeline from 8 o'clock to 8:20 p.m. In this timeline, they marked key points. 8:05, children leave the movie area. 8:10, faint lights of the red pickup seen by residents. 8:12, 8:17, time frame during which the children disappeared from view. 8:25, parents begin searching. 8:31, police called. The small gaps between these timestamps strongly suggested the children had entered the area near the pickup truck precisely when the suspect was present. This led police to focus on verifying the description of the man Deshawn saw. With assistance from a forensic sketch artist from Detroit PD, a standard composite sketch procedure was conducted. The child described the face using reference choices, identifying prominent features such as short, light-colored hair, cheekbone structure, and chin shape. To ensure accuracy, the artist had Deshawn revise details multiple times regarding relative height, body build, and the subject's posture. After compiling all consistent elements from Deshawn's statement and scattered adult descriptions, the first composite sketch of the suspect was completed. A middle-aged white man, average build, light-colored short hair, most likely wearing dark clothing at the time of appearance. Police combined the sketch with information about the red pickup truck to create a list of matching vehicles and prepare to expand checks in the coming hours. Within 48 hours of completing witness interviews and the suspect sketch, Detroit PD immediately launched the expanded search phase, focusing on the possibility that the group had been taken out of Brewster-Douglass by motor vehicle. Based on the disappearance window of 8:10, 8:17 p.m. and the description of the red pickup at the edge of the parking lot, investigators opened a 5-mile search radius along the most logical escape routes, including Greshot Avenue to the east, Brush Street and Beaubien Street to the south, and northwest directions leading toward abandoned areas bordering Eastern Market. Patrol teams were divided to sweep each possible route within a 10-15-minute travel window, corresponding to the time the suspect could have left the area after approaching the children. In parallel, police compiled a list of all red pickup trucks registered in the area, using DMV data combined with on-scene observations. The initial list included more than 40 vehicles with similar color, style, or size to the witness description. Patrol teams systematically approached each registered address to verify, checking license plates, vehicle condition, owner presence on the night of July 19th, and cross-checking alibis. Most owners were quickly ruled out due to witnesses placing them elsewhere, or because their vehicles did not match the observed position. Some similar-looking trucks were newer models that didn't fit the old Ford style described by witnesses. Meanwhile, the traffic investigation team examined feasible escape routes originating from the parking lot. The Brewster-Douglass area had many small exits leading to side streets, where a pickup could move without attracting attention amid city noise and the crowded movie event. Police assessed each exit for feasibility, roads wide enough for a truck to turn around, segments without surveillance cameras, and routes leading to low-population areas, like abandoned rows to the west, or access to major avenues where the perpetrator could quickly blend into traffic. Search teams noted no skid marks, no dragged items, or signs of collision at the exits, leading police to consider the hypothesis that the perpetrator approached the children in a way that caused them to voluntarily come closer or used a quick and discreet method before loading them into the vehicle. Based on the reconstructed timeline, investigators concluded that in under 10 minutes, if the perpetrator used the red pickup and left the area immediately after contacting the children, he could have escaped Brewster-Douglass in multiple directions before police were called, making it extremely difficult to determine the exact route. Several routes leading to sparsely populated areas, such as old storage yards or abandoned factories, were flagged as highly probable, as they met both criteria: low light and minimal camera surveillance. From the synthesis of these factors, police assessed that the likelihood of the children being removed from the housing complex by the red pickup was very high, and the next priority task was to narrow down the list of matching vehicles and identify the specific red pickup truck that had been present at the scene at the exact time of the disappearance. While the investigative team was focused on screening vehicles and suitable escape routes, 3 unexpected tips from the community arrived almost simultaneously, forcing the police to allocate manpower to verify each piece of information despite their initially low credibility. The first tip came from an anonymous call on the afternoon of July 20th, reporting that someone had seen 6 children with a strange man at the Dearborn gas station after 9 p.m. The investigation team immediately dispatched a unit to check the security cameras and interview the night shift employees. However, after comparing images and timestamps, they determined that the gas station had no record of the group of children or any man matching the description, leading to this tip being ruled out. The second tip emerged when an intoxicated man, arrested for disorderly conduct, told police that he knew where the 6 children were being held. Despite the incoherent statement, the investigation unit still separated the individual for private questioning to assess the seriousness of the claim. After checking his background, travel history, and cross-referencing his statement with his friends, police confirmed that this person had not left the Midtown area throughout the evening of July 19th and could not possibly have been at Brewster-Douglass during the time of the incident. The details he provided were contradictory, and none matched the crime scene data, so this lead was eliminated. The third tip was submitted by a resident living 2 blocks from Brewster-Douglass, who claimed to have seen a red pickup truck speeding on Gratiot Avenue around 8:20 p.m. Police immediately checked nearby traffic cameras and traced the license plate. The vehicle owner was verified as a man living in Grosse Pointe Park, with solid evidence of his whereabouts during the time of the incident. The truck itself did not match the details described by witness Deshawn, and an inspection of the vehicle interior showed no signs of unusual activity. After analysis, the investigation team concluded that the resident had simply observed an unrelated vehicle passing through the area at a random time. Verifying these 3 false leads consumed significant time and resources, forcing police to temporarily pause part of the screening of potentially related vehicles and disrupting the process of evaluating the suspect's possible escape routes. The most obvious negative impact was that many officers had to leave the Brewster-Douglass area just to verify false information, temporarily leaving the direct search zone understaffed at a time when maximum focus was needed. Additionally, the sudden calls created information noise, slowing down the screening of vehicles matching the description and delaying the collection of further witness statements from residents near the parking lot. After ruling out all 3 false leads, the investigation team revisited the core investigative direction, agreed to reduce the handling of unverified initial information, and re-established the tip intake process to minimize noise, only information with preliminary verifiable elements. Matching the timeline or initial description would be prioritized. This adjustment allowed the police force to refocus on actual leads, particularly the investigation direction concerning the red pickup truck and the routes the suspect may have used to leave the Brewster-Douglass area within the limited time window. Immediately after the 3 false leads were eliminated and the local investigation fell into a state of lacking clear direction, Detroit PD submitted a request for assistance to the FBI, asking the Behavioral Analysis Unit to participate in assessing the disappearance case due to its unusual nature. 6 children vanishing simultaneously in a very short time, no signs of struggle, no direct eyewitnesses to the abduction behavior, and the scene yielding no clear physical evidence. For the BAU, this was an extremely rare type of case, and they approached the file using in-depth behavioral analysis procedures for abductive events involving children. Right in the first meeting with Detroit PD, the BAU identified the most critical factor as the time window of the children's disappearance from 8:10 p.m. to 8:17 p.m. A maximum of 7 minutes in a setting surrounded by many people multiple light and sound sources, and terrain that would not allow quick running or movement of 4 to 6 children by a single person without a ready vehicle. The BAU concluded that the perpetrator almost certainly used a vehicle to approach, control, or lure the group of children, then left the area before any adult noticed. This also aligned with the description of the red pickup truck seen by the young witness. Further analysis focused on the specific terrain of Brewster-Douglass and its surrounding areas. This was a high-density residential area with old brick rows, narrow walkways, parking lots interspersed with poorly lit zones, and many nooks and crannies that only longtime residents would know well. Additionally, the area bordered abandoned rows of houses and roads leading to major streets such as Gratiot Avenue and Mack Avenue, allowing quick escape if the perpetrator was familiar with the layout. The BAU assessed that the offender was unlikely to live in Brewster-Douglass, but was certainly familiar with the terrain, had previously worked or lived in the surrounding area, or had regular reason to enter and exit without drawing attention. This also largely ruled out the possibility of an out-of-state perpetrator or someone passing through randomly. The BAU examined behavioral factors related to an individual being able to control multiple children in a short time. The children ranged in age from 7 to 14, making rapid coercion without noise difficult. Since the scene showed no signs of struggle, the BAU proposed 2 main possibilities. 1. The perpetrator used luring tactics, such as asking for help, offering candy, or creating a situation that caused the children to voluntarily approach the vehicle. Or 2. The perpetrator quickly closed in, using brief threats, a commanding voice, or an item concealed in the vehicle, to force silence and compliance. Both scenarios required the offender to have experience observing children's behavior, quick reaction ability, and sufficient emotional detachment to act in a crowded area without attracting attention. The BAU then analyzed the victim group to infer intent. The group included both boys and girls, with no standout individual characteristics for targeted selection. Thus, the perpetrator did not target a specific victim, but chose the group at an opportune moment. This suggested an opportunistic yet premeditated crime pattern, not an impulsive act. Regarding the suspect's age, the BAU, based on research into similar child abductions, concluded that the offender was most likely a male between 35 and 55 years old, an age range with sufficient physical capability to control a group of children, and also the most common age group in abductive crimes involving children. In terms of psychology, the BAU analyzed that the perpetrator likely belonged to the socially marginal group, individuals detached from the community, with a history of unemployment or unstable employment, limited social interaction, accustomed to moving in derelict areas and tending to keep distance from densely populated communities like Brewster-Douglass. This fit the hypothesis that the offender used low-light conditions and the structure of old housing to conceal his actions. The BO further expanded the profile by evaluating occupations and skills that could facilitate the crime. An individual previously employed in old construction, vehicle repair, or at closed factories, common occupations in Detroit, during 2000-2008, had a high fit level due to their habit of working in large, dark, abandoned spaces and their skills in operating or handling older vehicles such as vintage trucks. Additionally, the BO considered the possibility that the offender had prior connections to the area, may have appeared in Brewster-Douglass before the disappearance, possibly through acquaintances, seasonal work, or even having lived in a now abandoned building. All these factors were incorporated into the potential suspect profile. The BOE's initial conclusion was that the offender was most likely a middle-aged, solitary, unemployed, or freelance working man, familiar with Detroit's terrain, especially the old housing areas and regions bordering Packard Plant, using an old red pickup truck, acting quickly, confidently, and with calculation. This behavioral profile became a crucial foundation for narrowing the suspect pool and redirecting the entire investigation toward clearly identifying the man who appeared at the parking lot on the evening of July 19. In the 3 weeks following the delivery of the FBI BO behavioral profile, Detroit PD expanded the search scale to areas assessed as high risk based on terrain characteristics. The offender's likely familiarity with the area and the ability to use a vehicle to leave Brewster-Douglass in a short time. The first step was to inspect the nearby sewer and underground tunnel system, which extended under much of Midtown and connected to many former access points once used for drainage, infrastructure maintenance, or abandoned after years of disuse. The city's engineering team, in coordination with the search unit, deployed specialized cameras into each branch of the pipes, opened manholes along Brush Street and satellite access points around Brewster-Douglass, and checked for fresh mud, drag marks, or foreign objects that might have fallen in. When cross-referenced with the incident timeline, there was no indication that a group of 6 children could have been pulled or moved through any underground passage, and the mud in the sewers showed no recent movement corresponding to the 8:10, 8:20 p.m. window. Although the probability was low, police completed inspection of both main sewer branches and recorded no related findings. Next, the investigation shifted to checking basements and abandoned factories within a 5-mile radius, areas the BAU assessed the offender might know well. Detroit at that time had many abandoned industrial zones, particularly former icons of the automotive industry, which after factory closures became derelict, dark, with many open entrances and ideal locations if a suspect wanted to conceal quick criminal activity. The search teams divided into multiple groups, approaching basements under old warehouses along Gratiot Avenue, abandoned workshops near Mack Avenue, and old steel mills to the east. Each area was checked systematically, powerful lights scanned every corner, ground surfaces were examined for drag marks or fresh footprints, staircases to basements were inspected, and old storage rooms were opened to look for any related objects. After many days, results still showed no direct discoveries, no bodies, no children's belongings, no signs of their presence. Another key focus was the railroad area adjacent to Midtown's main axis, where many old rail cars were left abandoned, and secondary tracks formed a convenient network for a vehicle to exit Brewster-Douglass in just minutes. The investigation team moved along the tracks during daylight, checking each abandoned rail car, shining flashlights into dark recesses, and inspecting surrounding areas that could serve as temporary stopping points. However, there were no signs of habitation, no trash or items suggesting the children had been there. Teams reported that the ground showed no recent compression and the surrounding area remained thick with dust, indicating no movement near the time of disappearance. One location given special attention based on the BO's terrain analysis was the Packard Automotive Plant, a massive, long-abandoned factory complex with hundreds of empty rooms, numerous entrances, and large basements, considered terrain that only someone familiar could navigate easily. This was rated as the highest probability site among the high-risk locations, though not yet supported by clear evidence. In the first sweep, police divided the Packard plant into multiple sectors, with each sector checked independently by 2 teams to reduce the chance of oversight. High-powered flashlights scanned every room and corridor, and ground surfaces were examined for drag marks or disturbed dust. Special tactical teams checked mezzanines and basement staircases, where old pipes and abandoned tanks from the factory's operational days remained. Although the desolate scene matched the BOU analysis, no traces or objects related to the group of children were found. Reports noted that accessible ground areas showed no disturbance corresponding to the time of disappearance. Simultaneously, cadaver dogs were deployed to detect unusual odors or biological traces. Search dogs swept areas around Brewster-Douglass, especially spots with airflow and hidden corners where scents might linger. Some locations in abandoned rows produced mild alerts, but detailed checks found no evidence linking to the children. Reactions were attributed to old trash or animal smells. Cadaver dogs were also used in Packard plant, but responses were mainly contaminated by rust, iron, and industrial materials. After 3 weeks of continuous searching, numerous high-risk areas were examined against every criterion: proximity, distance, concealment, vehicle access, and offender approach potential. Despite the massive search effort, police obtained no direct results. The vast areas lacking evidence led the team to note that the offender most likely left the initial search zone shortly after abducting the children, or used a location that investigators could not yet identify based on available information at the time. The absence of any specific traces forced the team to re-evaluate all crime scene data and initial assumptions, but within the scope of 3 weeks of intensive search, all efforts failed to provide additional necessary information for case progression. By early August 2008, after nearly a month of wide-area search operations and inspection of numerous high-risk locations without any direct evidence recovered, the investigation team was forced to compile a comprehensive search results report and submit it to Detroit PD Command. The report clearly stated the situation: the entire sewer system, underground tunnels, abandoned factories, railroad areas, and many remote locations had been checked according to proper procedures, yet no bodies, no victim belongings, no ground disturbance, or any related biological indicators concerning the 6 children were found. All hypotheses about hiding locations within Brewster-Douglass or adjacent areas lacked physical corroboration. From an operational perspective, the report determined that the initial objective, direct search within the risk zone around the scene, had been completed, but failed to achieve the core goal of locating the children's position. In the overall assessment, Detroit PD Command recognized that the case was now missing key elements to maintain high priority: no new evidence, no specific suspect, no additional witnesses, and the full search effort had reached its maximum feasible limit without opening new directions. In the context of the city police force needing to allocate manpower to rising summer violence and increased patrol presence in multiple areas, priority for the disappearance case was gradually downgraded. Patrol units were reduced, the specialized search team no longer operated daily, and some resources were reassigned to more urgent or higher solvability cases. By mid-August, after determining there was no new information and the potential for discovering further scene evidence had been exhausted, Detroit PD informed the families that the case would transition from active search to pending investigation, a category for cases lacking viable investigative direction, but maintaining an open file for handling if new leads emerge. This status did not mean the case was closed, but activity levels decreased significantly, retaining only a small group to monitor incoming information and handle collected evidence. The initial physical evidence, glow sticks, witness statement reports, area maps, truck descriptions, and suspect sketches, was placed in storage, classified under the department's cold case system. The final comprehensive report on the 3-week search phase was completed, describing all searched areas, statistics on manpower, equipment, number of locations checked, evaluation of each search direction's suitability, and reasons for exclusion. Each item was archived to ensure that, should new data emerge, previous steps could be reviewed without repeating procedures. The victims' families were informed that police would continue maintaining the file, but at the present time, no further actions were being implemented due to lack of basis for opening new investigative directions. A sense of disappointment permeated the entire Brewster-Douglass community, but operationally, Detroit PD was forced to temporarily suspend expanded searching to avoid wasting resources on areas without remaining justification. By the end of August 2008, the case was officially recorded as pending, marking the temporary conclusion of the initial investigation phase, with the hope that a new lead or previously undiscovered evidence might surface in the future to restart the case-solving process. Moving into 2009, the economic situation in Detroit entered its worst period in decades, and this decline directly impacted the ability to investigate serious cases, including the file on the 6 missing children at Brewster-Douglass. The city faced a prolonged budget crisis, with many departments suffering severe cuts, the police force being one of the most heavily affected units. Resignation and layoff rates rose rapidly, the number of patrol officers decreased significantly, and specialized units such as missing children investigations, special crimes, or crime scene analysis were all downsized. With resources stretched thin, Detroit PD was forced to prioritize cases involving direct violence, emergency situations, or those with a higher likelihood of resolution, while cases lacking clear leads, like the Brewster-Douglass disappearances, fell off the top priority list. During this period, the original investigative team for the case continuously changed personnel due to reassignments or departures, severely disrupting continuity in handling the file. Periodic reviews to search for new leads were no longer scheduled regularly. Instead, the file was only revisited when sudden information came in from the community, most of which lacked sufficient investigative value. With each passing year, resources allocated to the case continued to shrink, and by 2011, almost no officer was actively following the file, except for a few personnel assigned to manage the department's pending case list. During the same time frame, the Brewster-Douglass Projects, the crime scene area where the children disappeared, continued to deteriorate severely. Crime rates rose, residents moved out en masse, and many buildings were abandoned or decayed to the point of being unusable. The city repeatedly discussed plans to demolish the entire housing project to prepare for urban redevelopment. By 2013, this plan was officially implemented. Brewster-Douglass was demolished in phases, starting with vacant resident blocks and spreading to the remaining areas. As the first walls came down, the original crime scene, including the parking lot, the row of houses where witnesses saw the red truck, and the area searched by police on the first night, was completely erased. From an investigative perspective, this demolition eliminated any remaining opportunity to re-examine or expand searches at the scene. Although the demolition was announced in advance, due to the lack of new guiding leads, Detroit PD had no sufficient legal or operational basis to conduct any excavation or additional inspection before the site was removed. Additionally, physical evidence collected in 2008, such as sketches, glow sticks, area maps, and witness statement reports, was reorganized according to the new storage procedures when the police department restructured its evidence warehouse. By the end of 2013, after most of Brewster-Douglass had been officially demolished, the file on the 6 missing children was transferred from pending to inactive case status. This decision was based on 3 factors: no new progress in over 5 years, the non-existence of the crime scene for re-examination, and Detroit PD's lack of manpower to maintain active investigation. The file was placed in the department's cold case storage, classified under the category Missing Juveniles. No suspect identified, meaning no specific suspect had been identified, and there was insufficient evidence to expand the investigation. Although it remained legally open, meaning it could be reinvestigated at any time if new leads emerged, in practice, the case was completely frozen. The file boxes were shelved alongside hundreds of other missing persons cases from Detroit's decline years, and the matter gradually faded from both police and community attention. Between 2009 and 2013, the story of the 6 Brewster-Douglass children became one of many tragedies swallowed by the city's systemic collapse. An unsolved case, lacking resources to pursue, and ultimately buried deep in storage with no one knowing when it might ever be reopened. Starting in 2014, as Detroit began restructuring its forces following the bankruptcy period, the police department launched a program to review long-standing backlogged cases, with some missing children cases given priority due to their severity and mysterious nature. During this process, Ray Alcott, a detective who transferred to the cold case unit after many years in crime scene analysis, was assigned to review a series of old files, including the Brewster-Douglass 6 missing children case. For Ray, this was a file hundreds of pages thick, but left almost entirely dormant since the demolition of Brewster-Douglass. He spent the first few weeks reading all the original 2008 reports, witness statements, scene logs, search reports, lists of red trucks previously checked, and the initial suspect sketch. As he cross-referenced each section, Ray recognized the fragmented nature of the earlier investigation. Many pieces of information were collected, but never connected into a coherent overall picture, largely due to lack of resources and time. Notably, sections of the 2008 reports concerning terrain, were presented disjointedly, without standardized maps, and the description of escape routes from Brewster-Douglass remained superficial, lacking detailed assessment of the perpetrator's possible use of a vehicle to leave the area within the established timeline. Realizing a more systematic approach was needed, Ray began digitizing the entire case file, then opened 2008 Detroit maps to cross-reference actual geographic locations at the time of the incident. He marked the last seen location of the children, the spot where a witness saw a man standing next to a red truck, the parking lot orientation, and direct exit routes from Brewster-Douglass before its destruction. From there, Ray reconstructed a correlation map showing 4 plausible directions of travel a truck could take within 5 minutes after approaching the children, based on 2008 nighttime road conditions and traffic patterns. Next, Ray rebuilt an accurate timeline of the disappearance. He pieced together every report. 2005, the children left the movie area. 2010, a witness saw the man by the truck. 2012, 2017, the children vanished. 2025, family began searching. 2031, 911. Call. When plotted on the same timeline, Ray identified a critical detail. If the perpetrator used the truck to leave immediately after 2010, he would have had a maximum of 5-7 minutes to load the children and depart the parking area before adults began noticing. This aligned with the FBI BAU assessment that the perpetrator must have used a vehicle and possessed good knowledge of the terrain. However, Ray noticed an anomaly in the 2008 reports. Although search teams had covered many areas in the first 3 weeks, there was no evidence they had ever thoroughly analyzed Packard Automotive Plant as a potential destination for the suspect, despite it being a large, deserted complex with many discrete entrances and only minutes away from Brewster-Douglass by vehicle. When reviewing the 2008 map, Ray saw that Packard Plant lay precisely in the direction the witness described the red truck starting up and leaving. The fact that this factory complex was not deeply evaluated early on represented a notable gap, possibly due to its vast size or the original team's insufficient manpower for a comprehensive search. Ray continued analyzing old street maps, comparing them with 2008 documents, revealing that Packard Plant had at least 3 truck-accessible entrances at the time, including one leading directly from a road where a resident reported seeing truck headlights turn on then off. These factors led Ray to mark Packard Plant as a key location, requiring review if the case were ever reopened. Additionally, he noticed another deficiency. The list of over 40 red trucks previously checked did not include unregistered vehicles, abandoned vehicles, or those registered outside the city, but frequently present in Detroit. This raised the possibility that the perpetrator had used a vehicle not included in the original checklist, limiting the suspect pool from the beginning. After compiling all the data, Ray created a new document outlining 4 investigative targets if the case were reopened. 1. Re-verify plausible travel directions of the red truck leaving Brewster-Douglass. 2. Conduct a comprehensive examination of Packard Plant if sufficient operational justification existed. 3. Re-review the list of older model red vehicles in the area, including those registered outside the city. And 4. Cross-reference the BAU behavioral profile with residency, occupation and employment history of individuals active in factories around the Midtown area during 2000-2008. These conclusions were not sufficient to restart the investigation between 2014-2020 due to the absence of decisive new evidence, but Ray kept the file on his personal priority list, believing the case had never been analyzed to its full depth, and that just one correctly timed detail could reactivate the entire old structure. That belief remained dormant in the file for many years until an entirely unforeseen event occurred. On the morning of April 15, 2021, around 9 a.m., a crew hired to continue the remaining demolition phase of the Packard Automotive Plant began work near the ground level of one of the eastern buildings. While using an excavator to clear rubble and collapsed concrete blocks, a worker noticed a small object mixed in the soil, with a color distinct from the surrounding construction debris. When he bent down to inspect it by hand, he discovered it was a small bone fragment, only a few centimeters in size, shaped similarly to a child's wrist or forearm bone. Realizing the object was not industrial material and could be biological in nature, the crew immediately halted work in the area and notified the site security unit. The information was quickly relayed to Detroit PD, and within less than 20 minutes, a patrol unit along with a crime scene team was dispatched to Packard plant to verify. The discovery area was immediately cordoned off, with a safety perimeter established to prevent disturbance by machinery or worker movement. Investigators collected the bone fragment according to standard procedure, packaged it in a specialized container, and sent it to the forensic lab for DNA analysis. While awaiting results, the preliminary team photographed the entire area, recorded the precise location with coordinates, mapped the ongoing demolition zone, and determined that the surrounding soil and materials showed no signs of recent disturbance, strongly suggesting the object had remained there for an extended period. 2 days later, the lab reported the DNA results to Detroit PD. The bone sample matched the genetic profile of Jordan Carver, one of the 6 victims missing from Brewster-Douglass in 2008. This was the first physical evidence directly linked to a victim in 13 years since the case went cold, surpassing all previously documented leads. The information was immediately forwarded to the cold case unit and reported to command, automatically triggering the transition of the file from inactive to active investigation status as the new evidence met the legal and operational criteria to reopen the entire case. Organizationally, reactivating the file meant Detroit PD had to re-establish a dedicated investigative team, allocate resources, and re-examine all old data in light of the new evidence. In an internal meeting held immediately after receiving the DNA results, the cold case unit presented the old file and proposed the lead investigator for the new phase. Since Ray Alcott was the detective who had studied the entire file from 2014-2020 and the only one with a detailed terrain analysis, reconstructed timeline map, and evaluations of potential travel routes to Packard plant, Command unanimously assigned him as lead investigator. This decision was based on 2 factors. Ray possessed the deepest knowledge of the case among remaining detectives, and his years earlier analysis had already identified Packard plant as an area warranting study if the case were reopened. An assessment now reinforced by the new DNA evidence. After accepting the new role, Ray immediately reviewed the lab report and compared the bone discovery location with the 2008 Packard plant map he had previously reconstructed. The location was near one of the secondary entrances he had marked as a possible access point. The perpetrator might have used, based on old street layout and resident descriptions, of seeing red truck headlights on the night of the disappearance. He also noted that the excavated area lay directly beneath one of the factory's interfloor corridors, an area that in 2008 had been abandoned and secluded enough to conceal a body before decomposition or time made evidence difficult to detect. It did not take Ray long to conclude that this discovery could not be coincidental if a bone fragment belonging to Jordan Carver was found inside Packard plant. It proved the perpetrator had used at least part of the factory space to handle or transport a victim. This was a pivotal turning point in the case, and the first time in over a decade that physical evidence directly connected a specific location to one of the victims. Immediately after receiving official notification of the file reactivation, Ray compiled a list of immediate next steps, collect all demolition site photographs, determine the next excavation scope, re-extract all 2008 witness statements related to Packard plant, and review all records of residents who had lived or worked in the surrounding area. Within hours of being assigned the task, he assembled the investigative team and prepared to restart a case that had been frozen for over 13 years. With a new clear focus placed squarely on Packard plant, the location where Jordan Carver's bone fragment had shifted the entire file from inactive back to active investigation status. Immediately after the bone fragment at Packard plant was identified as belonging to Jordan Carver and the case was reactivated as an active investigation. Ray Alcott focused on re-reviewing all old evidence and documents to find any detail that could prove useful when combined with modern technology. One of the first items he examined was the video clip extracted from a gas station camera near Brewster-Douglass on the evening of July 19, 2008. At the time, the image quality was only VGA level, with heavy noise, low light, and virtually unreadable license plates on passing vehicles. The 2008 report had explicitly noted that the video lacked sufficient resolution for exploitation, so it was archived without playing any role in the initial investigation. However, with advances in AI-based image restoration technology, Ray requested that the entire video be transferred to the department's Image Analysis Center for application of the latest enhancement techniques. The gas station at that time had two cameras, one facing the road, one facing the pump area. The road-facing camera captured traffic between 20 o'clock, 2020, a time frame consistent with the hypothesis that the red truck left Brewster-Douglass shortly after approaching the children. Ray requested extraction of all original data from the storage drive, including frames previously deemed blurry or unusable in 2008. The technical team fed the complete video into an AI-based restoration software, a deep learning system that reconstructs object edges, increases contrast, removes noise, and upscales resolution to analyzable levels. The processing took several hours as the software analyzed each pixel, predicted object shapes, eliminated glare, and corrected motion-blurred regions. Once the video was enhanced, Ray and the technical team began frame-by-frame chronological analysis. They focused on the window from 2009 to 2014, aligning with the time frame when the young witness saw the red truck at Brewster-Douglass. Among hundreds of enhanced frames, a sequence of 17 frames particularly caught their attention. A red truck, similar in shape to the older Ford model described by Deshaun Turner, appeared on the left edge of the screen as it turned from the Brewster-Douglass direction onto the main road and past the gas station. Previously too blurry to discern details, the AI technology recovered sharper outlines, the vehicle's profile, brake light positions, and rear box edges. Most significantly, when the technical team used the frame-by-frame magnification function, they discovered that although the license plate characters remained faint, their overall shape was identifiable. In the sixth frame of the sequence, the AI software reconstructed three characters in the middle of the plate, 7, 4, C. Though not enough to read the full plate, these three characters alone represented a major breakthrough because Michigan's 2008 vehicle registration system could be manually queried by character combinations. Ray immediately instructed the technical team to isolate this frame sequence, save static image versions, and timestamp them for analysis. He then coordinated with the Michigan DMV Vehicle Records Unit to conduct the lookup. To ensure accuracy, Ray requested reverse querying, search for all 2008 registered plates containing the combination 7, 4, C in the exact positions determined by that year's plate format. The initial results returned 7 vehicles, but Ray quickly eliminated the first 4 because their owners lived far from Detroit or did not own trucks. The remaining 3 were all red trucks, but only one matched both the witness description and the restored video image. A late 1980s Ford Ranger, registered to Elias Brenner, residing in eastern Detroit. Ray continued checking vehicle registration records to verify ownership in 2008 and uncovered another critical detail. Brenner had changed addresses twice between 2006-2009, one of which was only a few blocks from Brewster-Douglass, closely aligning with the FBI behavioral analysis that the perpetrator was likely familiar with the area but did not necessarily live directly at the scene. DMV records also confirmed that this truck remained operational in 2008 and was neither reported stolen nor sold according to any official documentation during the period of the crime. When Ray combined the vehicle make, the AI recovered partial plate, and the geographic analysis from the old file, he determined this was the first major breakthrough pointing to a specific suspect. Elias Brenner's name appearing in the DMV results matched 3 critical elements ownership of a matching red truck residence near the crime scene area in 2008, and a vehicle falling within the small group whose plates contained characters consistent with the newly restored AI data. All this information was documented by Ray in an internal report, including the restored images, plate comparison, vehicle path diagram from the video, and operational logic analysis. With this data, he officially identified Elias Brenner as the owner of the red truck present near the disappearance scene at the exact critical moment, an identification never made during the 2008 investigation. After determining that Elias Brenner was the owner of the red truck appearing in the 2008 video that had been AI-enhanced and restored, Ray Alcott immediately proposed to the command staff the implementation of covert long-term surveillance procedures to gather additional behavioral data and strengthen evidence before applying for an arrest warrant. Since Brenner had never been on the 2008 suspect list, all approaches had to be conducted discreetly to avoid leaking information or causing the subject to alter his movement patterns. A dedicated surveillance team was formed and operated for 90 days with a plan for continuous monitoring of Brenner at his temporary residence and the areas he frequently visited. According to DMV records, Brenner currently lived in a renovated abandoned house in the Eastern Market area, not far from Packard plant and close to a row of old industrial buildings, a location consistent with the FBI BAE behavioral analysis, indicating that the suspect tended to be connected to derelict areas. In the first few weeks, the surveillance team documented Brenner's daily behavior. He lived alone, primarily traveled by bicycle or on foot, appeared in low-traffic areas, performed odd jobs at a small auto repair shop, and often returned home at irregular hours, sometimes leaving before 5 a.m. or returning after midnight. No violent behavior or significant community interaction was recorded, but his social isolation and random movement patterns made Brenner a strong fit for the behavioral profile of the perpetrator previously constructed by the BAU. Throughout the 90-day surveillance period, the team noted that Brenner rarely left the east side of Detroit and frequently visited vacant lots, old warehouses, and abandoned factory corridors, areas matching those Ray had marked on the geographic map as potentially related to the case. Although all of Brenner's movements were documented, both the city investigative team and Ray understood that behavior alone was insufficient grounds for an arrest warrant. Physical evidence was required, and the decisive factor was DNA. Since Brenner was unaware he was under surveillance, the team waited for opportunities to collect indirect DNA samples from items he discarded in public. The first opportunity arose in the 6th week, when Brenner drank from a metal can at the premises of an abandoned warehouse and then threw the can into a communal trash bin. 2 covert surveillance officers recovered the metal can following special protocol, packaged it, and sent it to the forensics lab for DNA extraction from the rim. However, the first sample did not meet the required purity level because the can had come into contact with other objects in the trash, introducing contaminants. The surveillance team continued waiting for a cleaner opportunity. In the 13th week, Brenner purchased coffee from a small shop near Eastern Market, finished it, and discarded the paper cup in the trash bin right outside. A covert officer retrieved the cup within less than 2 minutes after Brenner left, ensuring proper chain of custody protocol. This time, the forensic laboratory successfully extracted a clear DNA sample from the cup rim and sent the results to Ray within a few days. Ray immediately requested a comparison with the DNA collected in the 2008 case, including the sample from the zip tie found in the Brewster-Douglass area during the initial search. That zip tie had been logged as a suspicious item at the time, but could not be evaluated for lack of a reference sample. When the new sample was compared to the 2008 DNA, the analysis system returned an absolute match, an undeniable match. This was the biggest breakthrough since the case was reopened. Brenner not only owned the red truck that appeared near the scene on the evening of July 19, 2008, but his DNA was also present on evidence from the area where the 6 missing children disappeared. Upon receiving the results, Ray prepared an urgent report compiling the entire surveillance process, suspect behavior, residence location, movement history, daily habits, geographic linkage analysis, and DNA evidence. He also included supporting materials such as the restored 2008 video images of the truck, DMV data confirming ownership, and the timeline of the vehicle's departure matching the video footage. The report was forwarded to the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office for Legal Sufficiency Review to obtain an arrest warrant under Michigan standards. With the matching DNA from the 2008 zip tie and vehicle verification from the restored video, the prosecutor concluded that there was probable cause sufficient to issue an arrest warrant for Brenner without needing additional evidence. All documents were prepared, reviewed, and submitted to the judge at the end of the third month of surveillance, the official ruling sufficient grounds for an arrest warrant, paving the way for the next phase of the investigation. In the early morning hours of August 21, 2021, immediately after judge approval of the arrest warrant for Elias Brenner, Detroit PD coordinated with the SWAT unit to execute a safe approach plan designed to prevent the suspect from destroying evidence. SWAT assessed that Brenner resided in a makeshift renovated abandoned house in Eastern Market, which had multiple secondary exits and broken windows that could serve as escape routes, requiring simultaneous containment from three sides. At 5:42 a.m., while the area was still very quiet, SWAT approached in unmarked vehicles, deploying 2 teams to the front and side doors, while a third team blocked the rear. Brenner was taken into custody just minutes after SWAT executed the door-breaching protocol and entered, with no significant resistance, and was handcuffed and removed according to procedure. Immediately after Brenner was removed, the scene team began a thorough search of the suspect's living space for evidence potentially related to the 2008 disappearances. The abandoned house had been partially renovated by Brenner, but retained its original structure: cracked brick walls, exposed metal beams in the ceiling, and a small basement containing many old items. In the main room, investigators discovered a wooden table pushed against the wall, covered with loose papers and old Detroit maps from 2007-2010, 2 of which had red pen markings around the Brewster-Douglass and Packard plant areas. Numerous circled notations appeared at intersections of side streets and abandoned buildings, indicating Brenner had tracked or studied the area's layout carefully over many years. These documents were immediately sealed and entered into evidence. In the drawer below the table, the team found personal notes containing fragmented itineraries of locations Brenner had visited: Eel Yard, North Lot, Old Plant Access, along with various undated time notations. Some other pages, determined to be years old, were written faintly in pencil and mostly faded, yet still contained phrases matching locations around Brewster-Douglass during the time of the disappearances. In one corner of the room, a plastic bin filled with miscellaneous items was open for inspection. Inside were several mechanical parts, nylon gloves, various plastic zip ties, including the same type and size as the evidence recovered in 2008. The scene team collected each item with specialized gloves and sealed them. Nearby, several old burlap sacks containing clothing, shoes, and personal items were also seized for further testing. Another detail that drew attention was in the small basement, where police found several pieces of wood, metal buckets, and an old tarp neatly placed in a dark corner. Although nothing directly confirmed their connection to the case, based on investigative experience, Ray requested their collection, as a suspect retaining items consistent with behavior in abandoned buildings was a significant indicator in overall analysis. During the search, investigators also noted a collapsed bookshelf where Brenner stored maps of the city by year. One was a 2008 Detroit map with marked exits from Brewster-Douglass in colored pen. This was noteworthy because it aligned with the geographic analysis Ray had constructed when rebuilding the timeline. All maps were seized for later comparison. After approximately 2 hours of searching the entire space and collecting necessary evidence, the scene team completed the on-site report, stating that Brenner's residence contained numerous items matching the behavioral profile described in the FBI BAU file, along with maps, notes, and potential case-related items connected to the 2008 disappearances. Brenner, after being taken into custody at the scene, was transported to Detroit Police Headquarters for questioning pursuant to the arrest warrant, marking a critical transition from the surveillance phase to direct investigation of the first suspect with sufficient evidence linking him to the disappearance of the 6 children at Brewster-Douglass. Within 1 hour of his arrest, Elias Brenner was placed in an interview room at Detroit PD headquarters, and a 48-hour questioning process was initiated in accordance with Michigan standards, consisting of 3 main sessions using 3 different strategies aimed at breaking the suspect's silence and gathering necessary information to locate the remaining bodies. The first interview session was conducted on the morning of August 21, 2021, with Ray Alcott and a supporting investigator present. Brenner was fully advised of his rights, including the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney, but he chose to proceed alone without immediately requesting counsel. When Ray asked the first question about whether Brenner had been in the Brewster-Douglass area on the evening of July 19, 2008, the suspect showed no reaction whatsoever. Throughout nearly 2 hours, every question regarding his movements in 2008, the red truck, or any connection to Packard plant went unanswered. Brenner sat motionless, avoiding eye contact, hands folded on the table. His complete silence made the first session yield almost no new information, but Ray viewed this as consistent with the behavioral profile, an isolated individual, accustomed to coping through withdrawal and not easily threatened by direct pressure. At the end of the first session, Ray noted that although Brenner remained silent, there were subtle facial changes when red truck, children, and Packard area were mentioned, despite his attempts to conceal them. The second interview session took place that same afternoon, using a completely different tactic. Instead of direct questioning, Ray presented the evidence chronologically to force Brenner to confront the strength of the case against him. First was the AI-restored gas station video, in which Brenner's red truck appeared far more clearly than in the original footage. Ray placed keyframes in front of him, showing the vehicle's shape and 3 matching license plate characters registered to Brenner in 2008. Brenner remained silent, but his gaze began to waver when Ray displayed images of the truck at the exact time witnesses reported seeing a man standing beside it in Brewster-Douglass. Next, Ray presented the DNA results. The sample from the discarded cup matched the DNA on the zip tie recovered from the 2008 scene, an absolute match. When Ray placed the lab report in front of him, Brenner shifted from active silence to passive tension, his hands clenching so hard his knuckles turned white. Although Brenner still spoke no words during the second session, Ray recognized this as the first time the suspect showed a genuinely clear reaction to the evidence. The third interview session, held on the morning of August 22, 2021, was the most critical and meticulously prepared by Ray based on insights gained from the previous 2. This time, he presented no new evidence, but instead used the tactic of fully reconstructing the timeline of the evening of July 19, 2008, describing every minute detail and continuously linking it to behavioral analysis, geographic data, and physical evidence. Ray began by precisely describing the 2005 time frame when the group of children left the movie area, then moved to the moment a witness saw a man standing next to the red truck in the parking lot. He pointed out that the window from 2010 to 2017 was sufficient for someone familiar with the terrain and possessing a vehicle to approach the children without attracting attention. Ray continued by describing the departure route captured by the gas station camera, matching the timing of the truck passing through the frame. He analyzed that only someone with deep knowledge of secondary exits, narrow streets, and dark travel routes could have left Brewster-Douglass so quickly. When Ray placed the reconstructed 2008 map in front of Brenner and traced the route consistent with the truck's path in the video, Brenner's facial tension became visibly pronounced. Ray spoke calmly, but each sentence emphasized the direct connection between Brenner and the case elements. DNA on the zip tie, the red truck, former residents near the scene, and routes leading to Packard plant, where Jordan Carver's bones were discovered. Brenner began breathing heavily when Ray mentioned Jordan's bone fragment, a detail impossible to deny, since at least one of the 6 victims had ended up at Packard plant, an area with which Brenner had a clear geographic connection. After nearly 2 hours of timeline reconstruction, Ray shifted from analytical to truth confrontation tactics, stressing that there were no remaining options except for Brenner to face the consequences. In a moment that felt compressed and extended at once, Brenner finally let his hands drop, leaned back in the chair, and whispered his first words since arrest. "I didn't hurt them the way everyone thinks." That was the beginning of the suspect's collapse. After several more minutes of silence, Brenner began speaking more clearly. He admitted to approaching the group of children on the evening of July 19, 2008, explaining that the children had come near his vehicle and he couldn't control himself, a description that avoided explicit detail but was sufficient to confirm criminal conduct. When Ray asked about the location of the remaining bodies, Brenner hesitated for a long time before stating that they were all in basement number 3 of Packard plant, not far from where the bone fragment was found. He described an entrance known only to those familiar with the factory, a secondary door buried under rubble, but leading down to a narrow corridor system connected to a deeper basement area. Brenner said he had placed the bodies there, between the concrete pillars and old metal drums, in a place no one would think to look, and where he believed they would never be found. This statement perfectly matched the location analysis Ray had previously marked on the 2008 terrain map. Brenner offered no specific motive for his actions, only repeatedly saying that everything happened too fast and he didn't know what to do afterward, but for investigators, the most critical information had been obtained: the precise location of the 5 remaining bodies and a direct admission of responsibility for the disappearances. The interview session concluded with an official record, establishing the legal and operational basis for the next step: verification of the statement through inspection of basement number 3 at Packard plant, a location Brenner described in such detail that fabrication was implausible. Immediately after Elias Brenner revealed the location of the 5 remaining bodies in basement number 3 of Packard plant, Detroit PD activated emergency excavation procedures involving the city's forensic team, crime scene search unit, and department technical personnel. Because Packard plant is a severely deteriorated abandoned industrial complex, accessing a basement over 30 years old required careful preparation to avoid collapse risks. On August 24, 2021, the secondary entrance described by Brenner was relocated by cross-referencing the 2008 map with current post-demolition photographs. After several hours of clearing rubble, a narrow entrance leading to a sloped staircase appeared exactly where Brenner had described during questioning. Technical crews reinforced the sagging ceiling and installed temporary lighting so the forensic team could enter safely. Upon descending into basement number 3, investigators found a large, dark space filled with deteriorated concrete pillars and rusted metal drums, matching Brenner's description completely. The floor consisted of mixed dirt and industrial debris, with long drag marks that appeared to have been made years earlier. The forensic team began grid searching the area according to a divided spatial plan, using object detection equipment, infrared cameras, and ground illumination to identify areas with unnatural disturbance. Within the first 2 hours, they located the first area, a depression in the floor covered by an old industrial tarp, very close to the position Brenner had described. When the soil and tarp were removed, the forensic team discovered skeletal remains and decomposing material of a juvenile body. The remains were recovered according to standard protocol and designated Victim A. From this point, the search for the remaining bodies was accelerated while maintaining strict caution. Based on Brenner's statement that he placed the bodies together in a group, the team expanded the excavation radius by 3 meters in each direction. By that afternoon, they located the second body, buried deeper in a concrete footing recess that had once supported industrial equipment. The third body was discovered on the morning of August 25, positioned between 2 twisted concrete pillars. Rusted metal drums surrounding the remains suggested Brenner may have used readily available industrial materials to conceal decomposition signs. Severe decomposition made recovery difficult, but the forensic unit still documented each location, depth in centimeters below surface, and level of contamination. By the evening of August 26, after expanding the search eastward in basement number 3, the team located the fourth body in a naturally curved recess of a collapsed wall section. This location exactly matched Brenner's description of finding the darkest, most concealed spot. The fifth and final remaining body was discovered on the morning of August 27th at the farthest point from the initial excavation center, but still within the area Brenner had indicated. All 5 bodies were located within a radius of less than 15 meters, confirming the statement that Brenner had not moved the bodies outside the basement, but used the same area for concealment. Once all remains were removed from Packard plant, the forensic team promptly transferred them to the laboratory for identification, autopsy documentation, and DNA analysis. Despite advanced decomposition, sufficient skeletal features remained to determine age, sex, and characteristics consistent with the records of the 6 missing victims from 2008. DNA from each set of remains was compared to stored family reference samples of the victims. The results confirmed absolute matches with the 5 remaining victims: Emily Carver, Alina Briggs, Marcus Lawson, Terry Lawson, and Luis Cortez. With Jordan Carver's identity already confirmed from the bone fragment found on April 15th, the identification process for all 6 victims was officially completed. Following identification, the forensic team prepared cause of death reports, though advanced decomposition prevented definitive determination in many details. Nevertheless, in at least 4 cases, examiners noted antemortem non-accidental bone fractures suggestive of violence. The remaining 2 cases could not be clearly determined, but showed no evidence of post-mortem movement. The comprehensive forensic report concluded that time of death was consistent with the night of July 19, 2008, aligning with data from the original investigation. Forensic findings also indicated that the bodies had not been moved after being hidden, proving Brenner had not returned to the basement for further handling. From an investigative standpoint, locating all 5 bodies precisely where Brenner indicated not only corroborated his confession, but completely eliminated any possibility that the suspect had fabricated or misdirected the statement to mislead investigators. The investigative team prepared a detailed field report spanning dozens of pages, documenting every excavation point, each body's position, and all related evidence. Everything was preserved in the case file for subsequent legal proceedings. When the final forensic report was completed on August 27, 2021, Detroit PD officially closed the case regarding physical evidence collection. This meant all 6 victims had been recovered. All forensic data supported the suspect's statements. All body disposal locations had been documented, and the disappearance case that had lasted more than 13 years finally reached a clear resolution within the scope of physical evidence. Packard plant, the site once considered one of Detroit's largest abandoned structures, now became the final resting place of truth for the 6 Brewster-Douglass children, with all scene evidence fully documented, bringing to an end over a decade of investigation in the shadows. On August 28, 2021, just 1 day after the forensic team completed the exhumation of the bodies and finalized the report confirming the identities of all 6 victims, the Detroit Police Department held a major press conference at its headquarters. This was the first time in over 13 years since the Brewster-Douglass disappearance that the police department could publicly announce that all victims had been found and that suspect Elias Brenner had been arrested along with irrefutable physical evidence. In the large, packed conference room, filled with newspaper, television reporters, and community representatives, the Detroit PD spokesperson presented a summary of the case's progress, from the discovery of bone fragments at Packard plant to the surveillance of the suspect, AI-enhanced video restoration, DNA matching, and finally the successful exhumation of the bodies. The announcement was delivered in a formal tone, but could not hide the gravity, as the resolution of the case also meant revealing that many children had perished in a tragedy that had stretched over more than a decade. When Ray Alcott, the lead investigator, was invited to speak, he briefly addressed the responsibility and the tireless work of the investigative team, emphasizing that the truth was uncovered only through persistent analysis and a stroke of luck when evidence emerged after years of being buried. However, the most anticipated part of the press conference was the response from the victims' families. When invited to speak after the official information segment, representatives from each family expressed both pain and relief at finally knowing the fate of their children. Some expressed gratitude to the current investigative team for never giving up, especially after the case had been frozen for so long. But many families also did not hide their anger, stressing that if the police in 2008 had worked more thoroughly, or if the initial search and investigative structure had been organized more effectively, they might have known the truth much earlier, and the crime scene might not have been lost when Brewster-Douglass was demolished. Numerous questions from the press immediately focused on this issue. Where was the accountability of Detroit PD in 2008? Why was Packard Plant, a location just minutes from Brewster-Douglass, not thoroughly searched? And why did the initial investigation overlook critical elements such as the red truck or the list of unregistered vehicles? Some journalists drew comparisons between the current team's use of AI technology to restore video and the helplessness of the 2008 team when they declared the footage unusable, questioning both professional competence and the level of priority the case had once received. Quick analyses and reports from local media even raised systemic issues. Detroit was in the midst of economic collapse at the time. The police force lacked manpower, budgets were slashed, and this directly impacted the case's progress. However, they also emphasized that these reasons were not sufficient to explain all the obvious errors in the initial investigation. National media quickly placed the case in the spotlight, particularly highlighting the tragic coincidence: the entire 2008 crime scene had been wiped out when Brewster-Douglass was demolished in 2013, making physical re-examination of evidence nearly impossible until new information surfaced at Packard Plant in 2021. The wave of reaction from the Detroit community erupted powerfully. Many residents, especially those who once lived in Brewster-Douglass, spoke out demanding that the police department take responsibility for the investigative shortcomings and called for an independent review of cold case missing children investigation. Some community groups organized memorial events at the vacant lot where Brewster-Douglass once stood and called for police reform to prevent similar mistakes in the future. Social organizations and children's rights advocacy groups held public forums demanding full transparency of the 2008 investigation files, as well as procedures for handling future missing persons cases. Public pressure forced the Detroit Police Department to issue a statement acknowledging that the initial investigation phase had been severely impacted by manpower shortages, lack of equipment, and inappropriate prioritization, resulting in the failure to fully search key areas such as Packard Plant. At the same time, the department committed to reviewing the entire process for handling missing children cases and strengthening specialized training. Although the community felt relief when the case was finally solved, the overall atmosphere remained overshadowed by a sense of loss and skepticism about the investigative system's capabilities during the earlier period. Detroit PD, in an effort to regain trust, affirmed that thanks to technological advances and the in-depth analysis of the current investigative team, justice had finally been brought to light, even if belatedly. However, for many families and Detroit residents, this story remains a reminder that delays and errors in investigation can prolong suffering for many years, a lesson that has made the community determined to demand stronger reforms to ensure no missing persons case is ever forgotten, as the 6 Brewster-Douglass children once were. The trial of Elias Brenner officially began on April 12, 2022, at Wayne County Court, drawing special attention from national media and a large number of Detroit residents due to the extreme severity of a case that had spanned more than 13 years. On the first day, the prosecution presented the full indictment, consisting of 6 counts of first-degree murder, 6 counts of child kidnapping, and 1 count of intentionally concealing bodies, while emphasizing that the entire sequence of events had been verified by physical evidence, the suspect's confession, and modern forensic data. The prosecution's opening focused on how evidence was reconstructed during the 2021 reinvestigation. particularly the role of AI technology in restoring the 2008 gas station video, which enabled positive identification of the red truck owned by Brenner exactly during the time frame of the disappearances. The video was played in the courtroom, with the license plate extracted by AI directly matched against DMV records, confirming Brenner's presence near the scene on the evening of July 19, 2008. The prosecution continued by presenting DNA evidence, the nail in the coffin of the entire case, including the DNA sample collected from the cup Brenner discarded in 2021 and the DNA on the drawstring recovered at Brewster-Douglass in 2008. The forensic report shown had an almost perfect match ratio, leaving no room for random chance. In addition, the forensic team was called to testify, detailing the process of exhuming the bodies in basement level 3 of Packard plant, the method of sample collection, analysis, and identity confirmation through DNA methods. The fact that the bodies of all 6 victims were found exactly where Brenner described during interrogation was a key factor in strengthening the prosecution's case. Next, the juvenile witness from 2008, now an adult, was called to testify about seeing a man standing next to a red truck at Brewster-Douglass around the time the group of children left the movie theater. Although memory was limited by time, the witness still recalled the color of the vehicle, the man's build, and the timing of his appearance. The comparison between the 2008 statement and the 2021 computer records showed significant consistency. The prosecution used this detail to supplement appropriate identification. It held sufficient supporting value for the case structure. When presenting arguments, the prosecution emphasized that Brenner's behavior matched a criminal profile, knowledge of the area, awareness of escape routes, choosing a crowded time to conceal his approach, and utilizing the Packard plant structure to hide the bodies. They asserted that Brenner had acted with intent, preparation, and a plan to leave the scene in his truck, an action that could not be attributed to accident or impulse. Meanwhile, Brenner's defense attorney attempted to build a case based on the defendant's history of mental disorders and antisocial tendencies, arguing that he did not fully comprehend his actions and that his confession during interrogation may have resulted from psychological pressure. However, this argument was strongly refuted by the prosecution with evidence that Brenner had deliberately concealed the bodies in multiple hard-to-access locations, clearly demonstrating calculation and awareness of legal consequences. The defense also tried to question the accuracy of the AI-restored video data, suggesting that technology could introduce noise or errors. However, a technical expert called by the prosecution explained the processing in detail, confirming that the AI restoration only clarified details already present in the original footage, did not create new information, and that the 3 visible license plate characters had an extremely low error rate when cross-checked with DMV data. When the jury was presented with all the evidence, video, DNA, maps, witness statements, and exhumation results, the case structure became very clear. Brenner was present at the scene, approached the group of children, left in a vehicle he owned, left DNA evidence at the scene, and ultimately hid the bodies of the 6 victims at Packard plant, exactly as described in his confession. On April 29, 2022, after weeks of trial and evidence summation, the jury entered deliberations. In under 4 hours, a remarkably short time for a multi-victim murder case, they reached a unanimous verdict. Elias Brenner committed the crimes intentionally, repeatedly, and engaged in body concealment to evade the law. On May 2, 2022, the court delivered the official sentence in the final hearing. The judge read the sentence before the complete silence of the courtroom. 6 consecutive life sentences without parole for the 6 murder counts, 6 30-year sentences for the child kidnapping counts, and 10 years for intentional body concealment. The sentences were to run consecutively, ensuring Brenner would never have the opportunity to return to society. When the sentence was pronounced, Brenner only bowed his head, offered no resistance, made no statement, and was escorted out of the courtroom. With this decision, the trial process closed a crucial chapter of the Brewster-Douglass case, marking the moment justice was officially served after 13 years of mystery, investigative errors, and prolonged pain for many families in the Detroit community. Immediately after Elias Brenner's sentence was announced on May 2, 2022, Detroit entered a phase of healing and reflection on one of the most painful cases in the city's history. That same summer, on the exact 14-year anniversary of the night of July 19, 2008, a large memorial ceremony was held at the vacant lot where the Brewster-Douglass Projects once stood before being demolished in 2013. No more old brick buildings, no more parking lot where the children were last seen, but the area had become an open space, a wide concrete slab with fresh paint strokes that the community had painted by hand to remember the 6 lost children. Hundreds of Detroit residents, including many who had been forced to leave Brewster-Douglass when the complex was demolished, gathered to light candles, lay flowers, and hang pieces of paper with memorial messages on the temporary metal fence surrounding the area. Families of all 6 victims were present. Many embraced each other amid sobs, but for the first time in over a decade, their pain was no longer tormented by the unknown. Now they could finally close a long and haunting journey. At the ceremony, speaking on behalf of the families, Emily Carver's mother stated that although the loss could never be compensated, finding their children's bodies had allowed them to put an end to the uncertainty that had lasted 14 years. Other relatives also emphasized their hope that this case, even though it ended late, would serve as a lesson for Detroit's entire law enforcement system about the importance of properly investing in missing children cases. Alongside remembrance, the ceremony also included a portion for the community and city representatives to officially reflect on the investigative failures of 2008. Many speakers, including social activists and city council members, openly acknowledged the severe deficiencies in resources, management, and investigative methods of Detroit PD at that time. Factors that caused the case to stall, evidence to be overlooked, the crime scene to be lost, and the case to remain frozen for over a decade. These mistakes not only directly harmed the victims' families, but also shook the trust of the entire community that once lived in Brewster-Douglass. Authorities, committed to reforming the missing persons case handling system, including upgrading technology, providing in-depth training, and ensuring that all missing children cases receive full attention and are not undervalued due to economic conditions or manpower shortages, as in the past. Alongside acknowledging responsibility, the Brenner case also created a profound impact on the Detroit community. For many years, Brewster-Douglass had been a symbol of urban decay, poverty, violence, and systemic neglect, and the disappearance of 6 children only deepened that image. But the solving of the case, even belatedly, turned this community into a focal point of solidarity and recovery. Community art projects began appearing at the vacant lot where Brewster-Douglass once existed. Resident groups organized annual remembrance programs to support families with missing children, and many nonprofit organizations used the case as motivation to advocate for child safety in high-risk areas. Local sociologists noted that this case had become a milestone in community awareness. Instead of viewing disappearances as an inevitable part of a decaying city, Detroit shifted to seeing them as a signal of the need to improve systems and rebuild trust between residents and police. At the city level, Detroit authorities accelerated the modernization of investigative units, strengthened cooperation with the FBI, and widely adopted data analysis, machine learning, and image processing technologies in unsolved cases. The police department also unlocked the cold case files, establishing an internal committee to review remaining cases and prevent any missing persons investigation from falling into the same prolonged stagnation as the Brewster-Douglass case. For the families of the 6 victims, despite the immense loss, they were finally able to hold full funerals after years of only having vague hope. Some chose to speak to the media, hoping their children's stories would give other families still trapped in the endless cycle of unresolved disappearances more faith that justice, though slow, can still arrive when the system and people are persistent enough. For Detroit, the case has ended, but its aftershocks remain. The city has witnessed the consequences of delay, error, and underinvestment At the same time, it has also seen the power of technology, meticulous analysis, and the determination of investigators in reopening a case that seemed buried forever. 14 years after that summer night, in 2008, Detroit is no longer the city drowning in decay as before, but the memory of the 6 Brewster-Douglass children will always remain as a reminder of the value of every life and the responsibility that the entire community must bear together to ensure no child is ever left in the darkness again. The story of the 6 Brewster-Douglass children and the more than 14-year journey to bring the truth to light is not only an exceptionally serious criminal case, but also reflects many existing issues in modern American life, from urban inequality, lack of resources for law enforcement agencies, to the importance of technology and community strength. In the context of modern America, where many major cities like Detroit, Chicago, or Baltimore still face impoverished neighborhoods, deteriorating infrastructure, and strong social divisions, this story reminds us that children in vulnerable communities are always the highest risk group and need the strictest protection. One of the painful realities from the case is that the initial investigation overlooked critical elements: the red truck appearing at the exact time, the Packard plant location just minutes from the scene, and escape routes that were not fully analyzed. These were not merely professional mistakes. They also clearly reflected the shortage of manpower and underinvestment in police forces in poor areas, a problem many U.S. cities still face today. The lesson for today's society is community safety cannot rely entirely on law enforcement agencies. It requires coordination between the government, the community, and technology. Parents should educate their children about public safety. Authorities need to invest in technologies such as AI and data analysis, the tools that once helped solve this case, and the community must maintain vigilance, ready to support and report anything unusual. The story also shows the importance of never giving up. Ray Alcott spent years reviewing old files, and thanks to technology and persistence, justice was eventually served. In an America that still has much injustice and inequality, the lesson of patience and never giving up is not only for investigators, but also for every citizen waiting for the day society becomes safer and more just. If you're interested in stories that help us see more clearly about community safety and justice, please remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. See you again in the next journey, where we continue to uncover truths buried by time.